The most dangerous thing I ever did was forget my novel in the guest room. Not dramatic, I know. No car chase, no confrontation in a parking lot. Just a 74-year-old man walking down a hallway to retrieve a paperback he'd left on a nightstand, and coming back with something entirely different in his shirt pocket. That single sheet of paper started everything. And by the time anyone realized what I'd done about it, it was already too late for them to do anything at all. My name is Jerry West. I'm 74 years old, and I live at 412 Gaston Street in the historic district of Savannah, Georgia. 3-story Victorian, original heart pine floors, wraparound porch. 10-foot ceilings. My late wife Ruth and I bought it in 1987 for what felt like an impossible amount of money and what would now look by comparison like a firm handshake and a fruit basket. Savannah's historic district is one of the most architecturally intact urban areas in the United States. The city was designed in 1733 by James Oglethorpe around a grid of public squares. 22 of them survive today, each one shaded by live oaks so old their roots have opinions about the sidewalk. People come from everywhere to walk those squares. I walk them every morning before 7, when the city still belongs to the people who actually live in it. Ruth walked them with me for 42 years. She passed 3 years ago, after a long illness she faced with more grace than it deserved. The house has been quieter since. Not empty. Lily fills it up twice a week. But quieter in the specific way that a house becomes quiet when the person who made it a home is no longer in it. Lily is 19. She is my granddaughter, Aaron's daughter from his first marriage, and she is currently a freshman at the Savannah College of Art and Design, studying architectural illustration. She lives 6 minutes from my front door and arrives with donuts from Back in the Day Bakery on Whitaker Street, like it's a toll she's legally required to pay. She has Ruth's eyes. That's all I need to say about her character. My son Aaron is 45. He lives in Atlanta, 4 hours up I-16, with his wife Brenda. Brenda is 43 years old and works as a licensed real estate agent, and has, for the 12 years she and Aaron have been married, looked at every room she enters the way a jeweler looks at an uncut stone. She is not a bad person. Exactly. She is a focused one. The problem is that what she focuses on is not always other people's well-being. Aaron is a good man who has spent a long marriage learning to call Brenda's agenda his own. I say that without cruelty. I say it the way you describe a compass that's been sitting too long next to a magnet. It still points somewhere, just not always north. Now, December 22nd. Aaron and Brenda came down to Savannah for 5 days over the holidays. It was the first time they'd been to the house in almost a year. The visit was pleasant enough on the surface, the kind of pleasant that requires effort to maintain, like holding a door open in a strong wind. Brenda complimented the kitchen. Aaron fixed the loose railing on the back steps, which I genuinely appreciated. Lily came for Christmas dinner, and we ate too much and watched one of Ruth's old movies, and it almost felt for a few hours like something whole. On the second day, I went to the guest room to get my novel, a Civil War history I'd been working through at a glacial pace, and noticed that the printer on the desk had something in its tray. Face up. My address at the top. I want to be clear. I don't snoop. I was not rifling through drawers or reading private messages. The paper was sitting in an open tray, face up, with my street address printed in the header. Any reasonable person in my position would have picked it up. I did. It was a comparative market analysis. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's a document real estate professionals prepare to estimate a property's current market value based on recent sales of comparable homes in the area. This one was printed on the letterhead of Brenda's agency, with my address at the top, 412 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia, 31401. Estimated current market value, $1.1 million. Recommended listing strategy. Off-market approach to minimize public visibility. Target buyer profile. Developer or high net worth private buyer seeking historic district property. I stood there in that guest room for a long time. I thought about Ruth refinishing these floors herself in the summer of 1994 because she didn't trust anyone else to get the color right. I thought about the Christmas tree that went in the front bay window every year for more than 40 years. I thought about Lily at that kitchen table, homework, arguments, laughter, all of it. Then I folded the paper, put it in the chest pocket of my flannel shirt, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of sweet tea. Aaron was in the living room watching a bowl game. Brenda was upstairs on a call. I sat at the kitchen table. I finished the tea. I rinsed the glass. Then I went upstairs, found my phone, and sent a text to Frank Dolan. Frank is 67 years old and has been an estate planning attorney in Savannah for 35 years. His office is on Bull Street, across from Monterey Square, one of the city's 22 historic squares, shaded by live oaks that were standing before the Constitution was written. Frank and I go back to the early 90s, when he helped Ruth and me draw up our first wills. He is measured, methodical, and has the particular gift of making large legal problems sound completely solvable. The text said, "Frank, need to meet? It's about the house. Not urgent, but needs to happen before the new year. Can you fit me in Thursday?" He replied within the hour. "Thursday at 9. I'll clear the morning." I put the phone in my pocket and went back downstairs to watch the second half of the bowl game with my son, who was laughing at something on television and had absolutely no idea that his father had just made the phone call that would determine the rest of the story. I didn't know yet what Aaron and Brenda had mapped out between them, but I knew enough. Frank's office looks exactly like a serious attorney's office should look. Dark wood, framed diplomas, the kind of quiet that tells you important things happen here and have for a long time. I sat across from him on a Thursday morning, December 26th. Aaron and Brenda were still in the house on Gaston Street. They were leaving the following day. I laid out everything. The market analysis, the conversations I'd noticed shifting over the past year, Aaron's careful questions about whether the stairs were difficult, whether the house was too much to manage alone, whether I'd looked at any of the retirement communities he'd apparently been researching. Each conversation individually could be explained away as concern. Together, they formed a pattern. I also told him about the power of attorney. 3 years earlier, at Aaron's suggestion, I had signed a limited power of attorney giving Aaron legal authority to make medical and financial decisions on my behalf in the event I became incapacitated. Unconscious, in a coma, medically unable to direct my own affairs. Frank had drafted it himself. It was narrow in scope and entirely appropriate as a precautionary document. But Frank confirmed, with the expression of a man who has seen this particular situation more times than he'd like, that a broad interpretation of that POA, in the hands of a motivated real estate agent with industry access and a willing spouse, could be used to create legal confusion around a property transaction, not bulletproof, not without challenge, but enough to muddy the water while a deal moved forward and a closing date approached. "What do you want to do, Jerry?" Frank asked. "I want to make sure this house stays in this family on my terms," I said. "Not Aaron's, not Brenda's, mine." Frank nodded. "Irrevocable living trust." That's what I was thinking. Here is what that means. For anyone who needs to know, an irrevocable living trust is a legal arrangement in which you transfer ownership of an asset, in this case, a house, into a trust that cannot be dissolved or altered without the consent of the named beneficiary. Once that transfer is made, the property is no longer your personal asset. It belongs to the trust. And because it is no longer your personal asset, no power of attorney, however broadly interpreted, gives anyone authority over it. The POA holder has power over what you own personally. The trust-held property is simply not in that category anymore. It also passes to the beneficiary without going through probate. It is managed by a trustee of your choosing, and it can be written to give you full right of occupancy for the rest of your life. You keep living in your house. You just can't be moved out of it against your will. In plain language, it is a legal vault. Lily as beneficiary, I told Frank. You as trustee. I retain the right of occupancy for life. Frank picked up his pen. I'll have the documents ready before the new year. I signed them on December 29th. Aaron and Brenda left for Atlanta on December 27th, 2 days before the ink was dry. They drove away from Gaston Street with no idea what had been set in motion while they were sleeping under my roof. The trust was filed and recorded with the Chatham County Clerk of Superior Court on January 3rd. My neighbor Dot Simmons, who lives directly across Gaston Street in a pale yellow house and is 71 years old and constitutionally incapable of minding her own business, had no idea any of it had happened. Neither did Tommy Reeves, my oldest friend, or Bill Hayes from the engineering firm. Not even Lily. I hadn't said a word to anyone. There is a particular kind of power in knowing what someone else doesn't know you know. I had 38 years of structural engineering to thank for that instinct. You don't announce the load-bearing wall, you just make sure it's standing. Now, February 8th, my birthday. A Saturday. Lily had come over the day before to help decorate. She'd strung lights on the porch and put a banner across the mantel, and baked a lemon cake from Ruth's recipe, the one with cream cheese frosting that Ruth made every year without fail. Dot came over with a peach cobbler and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, which is where they lived most of the time. Carl and Patty from 2 doors down. Tommy Reeves, who has been telling the same 4 jokes since 1978 and shows no signs of updating the material. My former colleague Bill Hayes, retired, still sharp as ever. It was a good afternoon. The kind Ruth would have orchestrated flawlessly, and that I managed adequately in her absence. Aaron and Brenda were not there. They were in Aspen, a work conference. Aaron had told me 3 weeks before. Client entertainment, unavoidable timing, terrible coincidence they'd do a proper birthday dinner in Atlanta when they got back. No gift arrived. No dinner was scheduled. The Aspen conference, I later gathered from a passing comment of Aaron's, was primarily conducted on a ski slope. The phone rang at 8:47 that evening, while Lily and I were cleaning up, and Dot was making a principled final stand against the remaining cobbler. I answered it on the wall phone in the kitchen. Yes, I still have a wall phone. No, I don't need anyone's opinion about it. Dad? Happy birthday, happy birthday. Sorry it's so late. We had a client dinner that ran long. You know how these things go. Ski lodge music in the background. The soft, expensive kind. I know how they go, I said. How was the day? You do something fun? Lily came. Some neighbors stopped by. It was a nice afternoon. Okay, listen. We'll do a proper celebration when we're back, okay? Brenda's already looking at restaurants. There's a place in Midtown she's been wanting to try. Looking forward to it, I said. 4 minutes. Brenda did not get on the phone. I said goodnight and went back to the kitchen. Lily was watching me with those Ruth eyes. Was that Dad? It was. She handed me a dish towel without another word. We finished the cleaning in a quiet that said everything neither of us felt the need to put into language. The house on Gaston Street was already in an irrevocable trust. Lily was already the beneficiary. Frank Dolan had already filed the paperwork with Chatham County. Aaron and Brenda were in Aspen making plans for something that no longer existed. I dried the last plate and put it away. I didn't need to say a word. The law had already said it for me. Patience is not something you're born with. It's something you develop when the alternative is making a move too soon and watching everything unravel. I spent 38 years as a civil engineer. Bridges, drainage systems, highway infrastructure across the state of Georgia. The entire discipline is built on one principle. You anticipate every force that will act on a structure before you build it, not after. You don't react to the problem. You design around it long before it arrives. Aaron and Brenda were a problem I had designed around in late December. What was happening in January was simply the forces arriving, right on schedule. January in Savannah is mild and a little deceptive, cool enough to make you think winter means business, warm enough in the afternoons to remind you it doesn't. The squares are at their most architectural in winter. The Spanish moss thins out, and you can see the shape of the oaks properly, the way you can read a building better before the scaffolding goes up. I walked them every morning. Wright Square, Chippewa Square, the long path around Forsyth Park. 3 miles round trip. The city at that hour belongs entirely to its residents. It was on one of those morning walks, the 3rd week of January, that my phone buzzed with a text from Dot. Jerry, there was a man at your house this morning while you were out. He had a clipboard and one of those measuring wheels, the kind surveyors use. Walked your property line on both sides, took pictures of the front and both side elevations. Didn't knock. Stayed maybe 20 minutes. White pickup truck, magnetic sign on the door. I couldn't read it from here. Did you hire someone? I stopped on the sidewalk in front of Colonial Park Cemetery, the oldest burial ground in the city, dating to 1750, which felt appropriate, and read that message twice. I had not hired anyone. I typed back. What did he look like? 40-ish, navy jacket, Wrote things on his clipboard the whole time. Professional. I thanked Dot, noted the date, January 21st, and sent a short message to Frank. Someone walked and photographed the property while I was out this morning. Building a file. Frank. Good. Keep documenting. Let it play out. That's what I appreciated about Frank Dolan. He didn't rattle. He built files. Over the next 2 weeks, Aaron called 3 times. Each call had the same underlying rhythm, the patient, rehearsed cadence of a salesman making a pitch he's been coached not to rush. Aaron has been a sales director for 15 years. I know exactly what a managed conversation sounds like coming from him. I've watched him do it at dinner tables since his 30s. The first call was about my health. Was I sleeping well? Getting to the cardiologist regularly? He'd read that 3-story homes could be difficult for men in their 70s. All those stairs. Had I noticed the stairs being harder? I take them one at a time, I told him. Same as always. The second call was about the real estate market. Had I been following what was happening with historic district property values? Just remarkable numbers, apparently. The development interest in that corridor was extraordinary. You're sitting on something significant, Dad. You know that, right? I live in a house, I said, not an investment. The third call introduced the concept of options, not nursing homes. He was careful with language, very careful. But active adult communities, resort-style living, pools, walking clubs, social programming. A man who'd worked as hard as I had deserved ease and community in his later years. His later years. I beat Aaron in a 5K fundraiser in 2019. He has never fully accepted it. I have community, I said. Dot across the street. Tommy Reeves. Lily over twice a week. I'm not lacking for company, Aaron. Just keep an open mind. That's all I'm saying. Mine's been open for 74 years, I said. It's the options that need to improve. Then Brenda called. In 12 years of marriage to my son, Brenda and I had maintained a relationship I'd describe as cordially parallel. We occupied the same holiday tables and Christmas dinners without ever quite intersecting. She was pleasant to me. I was pleasant to her. We both understood that the pleasantness was working hard. Jerry! Her voice had the particular warmth of someone who has decided, professionally, to be warm. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all. I was on the porch with my afternoon coffee. A mockingbird was doing something elaborate in the magnolia at the edge of the yard. I've been watching the historic district market pretty closely. It's part of what I do. And Jerry, the numbers on a property like yours right now are genuinely remarkable. I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't share what I'm seeing. There it is. Is that right? I said, in the tone of a man hearing this for the first time. Conservatively? A property in your location, in this condition, in this market, we're talking well over $1 million. The right buyer. Probably more. And Jerry, I know the house carries memories. I'd never push you toward anything that didn't feel right. But if you ever wanted to just explore, no commitment, nothing formal. Brenda, I said, I appreciate you thinking of me. Let me give it some thought. Of course. No rush at all. We hung up. I had given it all the thought it was going to get. 6 weeks ago, in Frank Dolan's office on Bull Street. Now here is the part of this story that Aaron and Brenda did not know. 2 weeks after the trust documents were signed and recorded, on January 15th, Frank sent a formal notification letter to Aaron at his Atlanta address. This was standard legal procedure. When a property is placed in trust, parties who hold any legal instrument related to that property, including a power of attorney, must be notified of the change in ownership status. The letter informed Aaron West, in clear and unambiguous terms, that 412 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia, 31401, had been transferred into the Gaston Street Irrevocable Living Trust, that Jerry West retained life estate rights, and that Lily West had been named sole beneficiary. It further stated that any attempt to sell, list, encumber, or transfer the property would constitute a violation of the trust and would be referred to the appropriate legal authorities. Aaron signed the certified mail receipt on January 17th. He had not mentioned it to me, not in any of the 3 phone calls, not in a single text, not once. Which meant one of 2 things: he hadn't opened it, or he had opened it and was pretending he hadn't. Either way, the machinery was still running. The property line visit, Brenda's call, the careful conversations, they were still moving forward as though the foundation hadn't been poured yet, as though the bridge wasn't already built. Frank had anticipated this. Before I'd even seen the property line surveyor's photos from DOT, Frank had been preparing a second document, this one with different language than the first. Where the January letter was procedural and informational, this second notice was a formal cease and desist. It named Brenda's agency directly. It referenced the January 21st property survey by date. It stated, plainly, that any listing activity, buyer solicitation, or attempted transfer of 412 Gaston Street would result in simultaneous referral to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office and the Georgia Real Estate Commission. Brenda's license would be at risk. Any buyer her agency brought to the table would be notified that the transaction was legally void. 2 copies were prepared. One was addressed to Aaron West at his Atlanta address. Frank's paralegal Kevin would drive it to Atlanta on Sunday morning, the day after my birthday, and deliver it in person, requiring a signature. The other copy was addressed to me at Gaston Street. Frank's paralegal Sandra would drive down from Bull Street the same Sunday morning and deliver it to my door. My confirmation that both notices had been served simultaneously on the same morning at both addresses. I told Lily to come over Sunday morning to help take down the birthday decorations. She thought that was the plan. I didn't know exactly how Aaron and Brenda would react when that second letter landed at their door, but I knew, with the absolute certainty of a man who has spent a career calculating what structures can and cannot bear, exactly what they could no longer do, and that was enough. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. Sunday, February 9th, the day after my birthday. Savannah in February has a particular light. Cool, silver, soft-edged, the kind of morning that makes the city look like it's been sketched in pencil. I'd been up since 6. Coffee made, flannel shirt on, good trousers, the house quiet in the way I'd come to appreciate rather than resist. I stood on the porch for a while and watched the square come awake. A jogger, a man walking a dog, a couple from one of the vacation rentals 2 streets over, heading toward the river with coffee cups in hand. Lily's car turned onto Gaston Street at 9:15. She had her canvas tote over one shoulder and a paper bag from back in the day bakery in her hand. Old-fashioneds and a lemon glazed. Because she knew. She kissed my cheek on the porch and handed me the bag. "Morning, Granddad. Ready for the lights?" "Coffee first," I said. "Come sit." We settled at the kitchen table with cups and donuts and the particular ease of 2 people who have spent enough time together to not need to fill every silence. She was telling me about a studio project, a rendered elevation study of a building on Madison Square 4 blocks from here. When the knock came. Not the knock a neighbor makes. 2 sets of 3, deliberate and unhurried. The knock of someone with a purpose and the patience to wait for it to be answered. Lily looked at me. "You expecting someone?" My heart was perfectly steady, for the record. No drama in the chest. No adrenaline. Just the calm of a man who set a thing in motion weeks ago and is now watching it arrive. I opened the front door. On the porch stood a young woman, Sandra, maybe 28, in a gray blazer, professional and composed, holding a sealed manila envelope with a clasp at the top. "Mr. West?" "That's me. Good morning, sir. I'm Sandra, from the law offices of Frank Dolan on Bull Street. Mr. Dolan asked me to deliver this to you personally this morning." She held out the envelope. "He also asked me to pass along a message directly. His exact words were, 'Both copies delivered.' Kevin confirmed receipt in Atlanta at 9:03. We're done, Jerry. Enjoy your Sunday." I took the envelope. "Tell Frank I'll call him Monday." "Yes, sir." She gave a small nod and walked back down the porch steps to the car at the curb. I closed the door. Lily was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me the way Ruth used to watch me when she knew something important was happening and had decided to let it arrive at its own pace. "Granddad, what is that?" I carried the envelope to the kitchen table and sat down, unclasped it slowly, no rushing, no theater, and spread the contents on the table. certified copy of the trust deed, the Chatham County recording stamp, official and ink blue, a cover letter from Frank summarizing what the trust contained, when it was filed and what it meant for anyone who might attempt to challenge it, and at the back, a copy of the cease and desist notice, with Brenda's agency name in the second paragraph and the Georgia Real Estate Commission referenced in the third. I read it once. Then I slid it across the table to Lily. She read carefully, the way she reads everything, methodically, line by line, without skipping ahead. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me. "Granddad." Her voice was quiet. Not shocked. Something closer to recognition. The way you feel when a shape you half expected finally comes into focus. "Did you know they were going to try to sell the house?" "I had a strong suspicion," I said. "Since when?" "Since the second day of their Christmas visit, the printer in the guest room." She looked at the ceiling, exhaled slowly. "And you didn't say anything to anyone?" "What would I have said?" "Lily, I found Brenda's market analysis in my guest room, with my address at the top. That's a warning. I didn't want to give a warning. I wanted to make it impossible, quietly, before they even finished planning. That's about the size of it." She picked up the cover letter and found the passage about the POA. "Read it. Set it down. It says here that the power of attorney wouldn't have worked once the house was in the trust." "Correct. A POA gives authority over personal assets. The moment the house transferred into the trust, it stopped being my personal asset. It became the trust's property. Aaron could have walked into any title company in Georgia with that POA, and it would have done him precisely nothing." Lily sat back in her chair. She was quiet for a long moment, and then, and this is one of the things I love most about this child, she started to laugh. Not at anyone, just at the sheer structural completeness of it, the way you laugh when you watch something work exactly the way it was designed to. "You built it like one of your bridges," she said. "Old habits," I said. "Aaron called at 2:17 that afternoon. I know the time because I checked my watch when the phone rang. A habit my father drilled into me as a boy. Always note when important things happen." He was right. Aaron's voice had none of the practiced smoothness from the January calls. The surface had been stripped clean. "Dad, I got a letter this morning. From Frank Dolan." "I know you did." "Dad, A pause. A long one. "When did this happen?" "The trust." "December 29th. Silence while he did the arithmetic. That was while we were still in Savannah for Christmas." "It was. So you already, when we were right there in the house, you had already..." He stopped. "Did Lily say something to you? Did someone tip you off?" "Nobody said anything. I found a document in the guest room printer, Aaron, on Brenda's agency letterhead. My address at the top, listing strategy and target buyer profile at the bottom." The silence this time was different, longer and denser. The silence of a man being asked to look at himself from the outside. "Dad, that was Brenda just running numbers. Being thorough. We weren't going to move on anything without sitting down with you first." "Aaron," I kept my voice level, not cold, not raised. I had decided months ago that anger was the wrong instrument for this conversation. "Let me tell you what I observed. Someone photographed and measured my property line on January 21st, without my knowledge. Brenda called me to pitch the market value of my home. You called me 3 times to suggest the house was too much for me, and to recommend senior communities. And you signed the receipt for Frank's January 15th letter on the 17th, and said nothing to me about it. Not once. Not a word from the other end. I'm not asking you to confess anything," I said. "I'm telling you what I saw, and I'm telling you that the house is in a trust that cannot be touched, and that the decision about where it goes when I'm done with it has already been made, and that it was mine to make." When Aaron finally spoke, his voice had dropped an octave and shed about 15 years of professional conditioning along with it. "I know, Dad. I know." Brenda kept framing it as practical, that the house was too big for one person, that the money could set you up for life, that you'd be better off somewhere with people around you. And a pause. I let her frame it that way. I told myself it was for you. I think I mostly knew it wasn't. That was the most honest thing Aaron had said to me in years. The house was your mother's, I said quietly. She picked it. She refinished those floors herself. Her handwriting is still on the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer. This is not an asset, Aaron. It's the place where our family happened. It's the place where our family happened. He didn't say anything. I could hear him breathing. You're my son, I said. That doesn't change. But going forward, we're honest with each other. Even when the honesty is uncomfortable, we don't conduct business behind each other's backs and call it concern. Do you understand me? Yeah, Dad. Quietly. I do. Good. Then let's start from there. We talked for another 40 minutes. Not about the house. We'd said everything that needed to be said about the house. We talked about Aaron. About the slow, incremental way a person can lose track of their own instincts when they spend years letting someone else's judgment stand in for theirs. About what that does to a man over time. About how you get back, he cried at one point. Not dramatically. Just the small, released sound of someone setting down something heavy they'd been carrying for longer than they realized. I hadn't planned for that. But I let it be what it was. Some things don't need to be fixed. They just need to be witnessed. By the end of the call, we hadn't resolved anything, technically, but we had done something more useful than resolution. We had started telling each other the truth. That was the first real conversation we'd had in a long time. I wasn't going to waste it. Now, I want to say something that matters beyond this particular story, because what happened to me is not unusual, and I want the people listening to have the information they need before they find themselves in the same position. What Aaron and Brenda were attempting sits squarely in a category that elder law attorneys and law enforcement professionals call financial elder abuse. It is among the most common and most underreported forms of abuse in the United States. According to the National Council on Aging, financial exploitation affects roughly 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 60, and in the overwhelming majority of cases, the person doing it is a family member. Here is the most important thing to understand. It rarely looks like theft. It looks like concern. It arrives wearing the language of practicality. The house is too much for you. The money would set you up. We're just thinking about what's best. The framing is almost always loving. The mechanism is almost always control. An irrevocable living trust is one of the most effective legal tools available for protecting your home and your estate from this kind of situation. Once your property is in the trust, it is no longer a personal asset, which means no power of attorney, however it's worded, gives anyone authority over it. It is managed by a trustee of your choosing, passes to your beneficiary without going through probate, and can be structured to guarantee you the right to live in your home for the rest of your life. This is not complicated to set up. An estate planning attorney in your city can have the documents prepared and filed in a matter of weeks. The second thing I want you to take away is simpler. Being old does not mean being slow. Do not let anyone, family, advisor, neighbor, mistake your age for your incompetence. I was a civil engineer for 38 years. I have built infrastructure that is still standing. I raised a child. I buried a wife. I am in full possession of my faculties, and I intend to remain so until further notice. If something feels wrong, a conversation that probes too carefully, a document that shows up where it shouldn't, a question that seems designed to gather information rather than connection, trust that instinct. Note the date. Call your attorney. Do it quietly. Don't wait for someone to knock on your door. Be the one who arranged the knock. It has been 3 weeks since that Sunday. Dot came over last Tuesday with a sweet potato pie. She shows up with food the way other people show up with opinions, generously and without being asked, and mentioned she'd seen Aaron's car on Gaston Street the previous weekend. He hadn't told me he was coming. That afternoon, Lily texted, "Dad came by the coffee shop near campus. We sat for a while. I think he's trying. Thought you should know. I sat with that for a long time." Then I texted back, "Good. Let him." Aaron and I have spoken twice since the February call. The conversations are different now. Less constructed, less managed. He asks how I'm actually doing instead of asking in the way that's really a survey of my deterioration timeline. He mentioned last week briefly that he and Brenda were in couples counseling. I didn't ask for details, I told him that sounded like a wise thing to do, and I meant every word of it. Brenda has not called. I don't expect she will for some time. That's all right. Some distances need to stay in place a while before they can be closed properly. Lily comes over twice a week. She's deep into a studio project on Savannah's architectural history, which means she asks me questions about the historic district that I am, I'll admit, disproportionately delighted to answer at length. Last Thursday, she brought her sketchbook and spent 2 hours drawing the house from the street. Different angles, different light. Before she left, she stood on the bottom porch step, looked up at the facade, and was quiet in the way she gets when something is settling in her. "You're going to leave me a good house, Granddad," she said. "That was always the plan," I told her. The house is in 412 Gaston Street. The heart pine floors are original. The wraparound porch is where Ruth argued with the squirrels about the bird feeder every morning for more than 40 years before she passed on. It is held in the Gaston Street Irrevocable Living Trust, recorded with Chatham County, and it will pass to the person it was always meant for, whenever the time comes, on nobody's schedule but mine. Nobody took it from me. They couldn't have. I'm 74 years old and I built bridges for a living. I know how to make something that holds. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.